Chapter 26. Here, here! Hitch grabbed Cielo by her arm, dragging her into the open doorway of her home. One in a line they had been running along, seemingly chosen at random. Slamming the door shut, he threw the bolt into place and whirled back to take in their surroundings. Cielo was already tense and ready, brandishing a dagger. "Wait here," Hitch called as he bolted up the stairs. Cielo stood looking at the ceiling, turning her head to track the noise Hitch was making, as he quickly tossed the rooms to make sure they were alone. Stopping at the top of the stairs, he sucked great gulps of air into his lungs as he slowly started to descend. His fists balled around the corners of some blankets he was dragging behind himself down the stairs. Cielo rushed over and helped him over to a chair. The adrenaline of the moment was quickly wearing off, leaving his body to suffer the slings and arrows of age and exhaustion. "I'll be all right in a minute. Check the kitchen. I'd kill for a cup of tar-bean tea." Cielo stopped to fuss over him, trying to pull the blankets up over his legs. He swatted her hands away. "I'm no wizened ancestor propped up by the fireplace. These blankets are to disguise us, not warm these bones." Cielo turned, rolling her eyes as she made her way across the living room floor. "No lights," Hitch called out as Cielo patted the walls, searching for something to ignite. The flickering flames outside provided some light to try and work by. Squatting down, she crawled across the floor towards a small wooden barrel. Twisting it around in place, she angled in the light to try and read what had been burned into the side. "Pickles," she called out to Hitch as she made a horrified face while sticking out her tongue. She felt the warmth of the blackened potbelly stove before she made out its silhouette. Cracking the handle, she risked sneaking a peek and saw the coals had burned down to a dull red. Keeping the door only partway open, she reached for small pieces of wood from the pile beside the stove and tossed them in, causing embers to swirl before the door was locked back into place. Waiting for the kettle to boil, she peered into the kitchen, into the darkness of drawers, running her hand over the items within. She scanned the clay pots arranged along the shelves, lifting them up and gently shaking each in turn until she came across one heavier than the rest. Its contents clacked together when she shook it. Lifting the lid, she pulled out a small leather pouch, hefting it in her hands. For a moment, she thought she had found the meager savings of the household and felt a twinge of guilt until she opened the pouch and poured the contents into her palm. Small glass spheres rolled and clacked against each other. Marbles of colourful patterns and various sizes. They looked like little worlds unto themselves. She marvelled at their designs and pondered how they ever managed to trap the colourful streaks inside. She placed the marbles back into their pouch, slipping it into her pocket to admire later as she restored the jar to its place on the shelf. Soon, steam was rising from the open mouth of the kettle, and before long, Hitch and Cielo were sitting in the living room, sipping their hot drinks as though the city outside was not being consumed. Cielo was the first to break the silence. "Hitch, are we the bad guys?" Hitch paused for a moment, his hands wrapped around his mug. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" Cielo was ready with her response. "Because this is the second city we have burned to the ground." Hitch took a moment to smile to himself before his features hardened. "The people in the first city wanted to sell you into slavery for the crime of being born human. If we had not managed to escape, right now you would be eating black bread for your dinner and sleeping on the bare ground in filthy rags that would not replace even once they had rotted from your body." Hitch's words painted a vivid picture in her mind's eye as he continued. "That man that was paying you a lot of attention before we got split up, did he try something with you?" Cielo stared at her feet, unable to answer. She had been so lucky in her escape, it did not seem possible that she had somehow managed to best that brutal man. Hitch was on his feet in an instant, his hands extended out. She placed her hands in his. "Well, the soldiers of this town don't care about what would have happened to you, only that they did not get to take part themselves." Cielo looked up to meet his gaze with tears in her eyes. "As you felt no guilt when you killed game for the cooking pot back at home, feel no guilt in what we have had to do to survive out here in the wilds of civilized lands. This is the truth that I tried to shield you from. The more I tried to keep you safe, the more you rebelled with thoughts of all the many adventures you had read about in my library. You never read about anything quite like this, did you? Cielo shook her head as she recalled the tales of high adventures presented in the many leather-bound volumes she had spent long nights poring over by the light of their fireplace. Click, clock, click, clock. They froze at the sound of the hooves slowly clacking their way along the sidewalk. The horned silhouette of a figure strode along the far wall as though a demon had escaped from the abyss. Minotaur. Hitch whispered in Cielo's ear. Pressing themselves flat to the floor, they crawled towards the kitchen. Click, clock, click, clock. The sound of the hooves grew more distant as the beast crossed to the other side of the street. They dared to sneak over to the nearest window. Slowly rising to a kneeling position, they peeked over the windowsill as the Blessed One, backlit by the raging fires, raised its head to draw in a huge whiff of the smoke-filled air. It paused for a moment to contemplate the scents, as a noble lord with a goblet of fine elven wine. Did I hear you mention pickles before? Hitch asked Cielo, who turned to him with a quizzical expression. How could he be thinking about his stomach at a time like this? She pointed to the small wooden barrel under the bench. Dropping back down, he shuffled over. Gripping the handle, he lifted the wooden lid. The pickles bobbed on the surface of the briny fluid. The pungent smell of vinegar and sulphur filled his nostrils with great satisfaction. Scooping out a pickle, he started to happily munch away as he took the blankets and pushed them down into the barrel. Pickles and brine flowed over the sides to spill out onto the kitchen floor, causing Cielo to skitter backwards. No point trying to avoid it, because you're just about to wear it. Hitch continued to chew as he spoke. The smell of the brine will help cover our scent. Cielo hissed her interjection. It would cover the smell of a goblin fart in a closed tent. Hitch shot back. I'd rather face 100 flatulent foes than the bovine beast out there. He wrapped the soaking blanket around her neck and shoulders, the cool liquid seeping through her clothes, causing her to shiver. As he wrapped his own blanket over his armor, he reached for another pickle, stuffing it into his mouth as he took off crawling across the floor again. Where are we going now? Cielo hissed at the wiggling dwarven butt before her. The same place you should always go in a fight. We take the high ground. Suddenly Hitch stopped moving and Cielo crawled straight into him, the top of her head butting against the seat of his pants. She stumbled back for a moment and was about to call out to Hitch to get moving when she noticed something terrible in the corner of her eye. The Blessed One's face was pressed sideways up against the window pane, the monstrous proportions of its face filling the frame. Bursts of hot air shot from its wide nostrils to fog the glass as blood-red eyes bore through its prey. No one moved for a moment until Hitch was suddenly on his feet, bellowing, "The stairs! Go!" In half a second, Cielo was on her feet in hot pursuit across the living room floor. Glass shattered behind them as huge fists balled and punched through the shattering panes, spreading wood and glass everywhere. Hitch stopped at the bottom of the stairs and turned, waving for Cielo to take the lead. She sprang up the stairs 2 at a time, heading for the rear rooms. The building shook as the Minotaur, far too wide to fit through the frame, took out its frustrations by ramming itself violently into the side of the structure. Hitch gripped the handrail as he hauled himself up the stairs, hand over hand, as he pumped his knees up high to clear each foot for the next step. Suddenly, seeming to remember that doors existed, the Minotaur charged out and around in a wide loop to approach the door, head-on at full pelt. Lowering its head at the last second, it snapped the door from its frame, with the iron hinges still attached. The door shot across the room to smash into the modest dining room table, shattering it to pieces. "Go! Go!" Hitch roared as Cielo sprang from her perch, squatting on the second-story windowsill. As her legs uncoiled, she rocketed out into the air, seeming to fly for a moment across the narrow alleyway before landing on the roof of the adjacent building. The Minotaur thundered up the stairs in hot pursuit, hooves cracking steps, causing it to trip and stumble, fingers crawling at the wall and handrail to recover its balance. Hitch hauled himself onto the windowsill as the thunderous crashing grew louder behind him. "Get back, girl!" Hitch shouted as he brandished his axe. She could see something moving in the darkness behind him. Spreading his arms wide, Hitch leapt out into the moonlight. Time seemed to slow as his hands came forward to grip the axe, which he stuck straight out, the blade held vertically. Huge hands burst from the darkness behind him to claw at empty air. Without the axe, Hitch would have never made the gap, the sharp corner of the bottom edge acting like a hook that dug deep into the wooden roof. Hitch swung downward into the side of the building, the soles of his feet taking the jarring impact. He could practically feel the hot, snorting breath of the Minotaur as it strained to stick its head out of the window. His hands began to slip down the haft of the handle. One hand let go of the axe for a moment, reaching up for the lip of the roof. The grip of his remaining hand slipped, and for a horrifying moment he felt himself beginning to plummet to the ground below, before Cielo appeared, her arm shooting down to grip his flailing hand. Bending at the knees, she braced her back, and with a face-reddening effort that threatened to tear her shoulders from their sockets, she managed to pull his hand up high enough to grip onto the edge of the roof. His other hand quickly followed shortly before he threw his foot over and was able to scramble to his feet. Turning to retrieve his axe, he saw the Minotaur still staring. It was not straining as before. The raging frenzy was gone, and in its place was a mask of cold composure. Slowly it withdrew back into the shadows of the room. "Death comes for you." The calm, eloquent delivery sent shivers up their spines. Cielo gripped Hitch's arm to pull him away, and he did not resist. The Minotaur stepped backwards, mirroring their own movements, while never taking his gaze from them. His terrible violet eyes glowed as he stepped further and further backwards into the darkness. Cielo and Hitch matched the same slow pace as they retreated across the rooftop, Cielo looking over her shoulder, trying to plot their escape route. The Minotaur was mid-stride when his back bumped into the wall behind him. He paused for a moment, his glowing eyes continuing to bore into them, before he broke for the doorway at a sprint. "Run!" Hitch and Cielo shouted in unison as they turned and started sprinting across the connected rooftops. The Minotaur took the stairs at a flying leap, sailing over the first few steps before landing on an extended cloven hoof. The timbers of the simple dwelling had been made to handle the weight of its human residents only. Several boards had already cracked, with sections snapping off as the beast had made its frantic ascent in pursuit of its prey. The falling weight of the descent was the final straw. The board parted in half as though it had never been a solid piece. Its leg sank up to its thigh, the jagged edges of the board gouging channels into its flesh as it arrested its fall. The forward momentum swung the upper half of its body forward in a hammer blow that shattered the remaining steps to pieces, dropping it down onto the floor underneath the staircase. Hitch and Cielo turned at the booming crash and expected to see it come streaming around the corner at full pelt any second. They skidded to a halt on the edge of the rooftop, turning to lower themselves down. They hung for a second before letting go, dropping to the hard stones below. Cielo's legs took the impact, but she was still driven to a squatting position, her bottom almost striking the floor. Due to his short stature, Hitch had further to fall. Landed awkwardly, he pitched to the side, crashing into Cielo. They quickly scrambled to their feet, scraping their hands and knees. A narrow alleyway loomed ahead, a gaping maw of darkness that under usual circumstances would test the will of most men. With a raging Minotaur potentially seconds behind them, it was as safe and inviting as their own beds. Leaping forward, they covered the short distance until they were plunged into deep shadow, their legs continuing to pump as they put as much distance between themselves and the beast hunting them.